All right, let's dive right in. Picture this. It's World War I. The world is in chaos. And in the middle of it all, a small group of astrologers is trying to solve a very real life-or-death problem. What they believe they found were unseen forces in the universe, all because they were trying to answer one unbelievable question.
Yeah, you heard that right. Could invisible planets actually predict where artillery fire would land? This wasn't some kind of philosophical game. For them, it was a desperate attempt to use the stars to pinpoint the location of incoming Russian shells. So the story of these mysterious planets, it doesn't begin in some quiet observatory. It begins right on the front lines.
So let's really set the scene here. We're talking about Germany during the Great War. It's a time of just immense, unprecedented chaos, and people were desperately searching for any kind of predictable order in the middle of it all.
And, it's a classic case of pressure creating something new, right? The absolute chaos of the war created this urgent need for a much more precise, more predictive system. And that need led directly to the first publication about these new theoretical planets in 1923. But they didn't stop there. They spent the next couple of decades testing and refining their ideas against major world events.
Now, at the very heart of this story is a small group in Hamburg, Germany. They called themselves the Kepler Circle, and they were led by a guy named Alfred Whittet. Their mission? To make astrology a more exact science. A tool that could give them concrete, reliable answers in a world that felt like it had none.
Well, they pretty quickly hit a wall. They realized their traditional methods, everything they'd learned, just couldn't keep up. The tools they had were not adequate to describe the sheer scale of what was happening. The war was just beyond anything their existing models could explain. They realized they had to invent something new. And this need for a new tool, well, it didn't just lead to a few small tweaks. No, it led to the birth of a completely new school of thought, what came to be called the Uranian system. So what exactly is it? Well, Uranian astrology is all about precision. It uses these really specific mathematical points that fall exactly between planets. They call them midpoints, and a special 90-degree chart that helps focus in on the most intense connections. The folks who created it, they saw it as a purely scientific evolution of astrology, a real break from the past. Probably the best way to really get the leap they were trying to make is this. Think of traditional astrology as algebra. It's the foundation, the basic rules. Well, Uranian astrology claimed to be the calculus that builds on top of that algebra, a higher-level application designed to get at much, much deeper insights.
And the most radical, the most out-there insight to come from this new astrological calculus was the theoretical discovery of 8 new celestial bodies. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. They were invisible.
So instead of pointing a telescope at the sky, Whittet and his colleague Friedrich Seegruin did something amazing. They basically worked backward. They'd look at huge world events, battles, treaties, even market crashes. And when the planets we already knew about couldn't explain what was happening, they calculated the exact location and orbit of a hypothetical energy point that would explain it.
And here they are, the Invisible 8. As you can see, they all got these classic mythological names and represent really specific kinds of forces. You've got positive ones like Cupido, which is all about groups and harmony, or Apollon for expansion and science. But then you also have these much darker energies like Hades, representing decay and secrets, and Admetos, which is all about standstill and limitation.
And that really brings up a critical point about context. Why do forces like Hades and Admetos sound so grim? It's because their meanings were figured out during one of the darkest periods in modern history. We're talking global war, the Great Depression, the rise of fascism. The very events they used to identify these points were overwhelmingly negative.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how do you even wrap your head around these abstract ideas? Well, the creators came up with a pretty clever metaphor and then made a really astonishing claim about how these things work in the real world.
They explained it with a simple garden metaphor. So Hades is like the deep, unseen work happening under the soil. Admetos is the seed, just sitting there at a standstill, waiting. Zeus is that first spark of germination. Then Vulcanus is the powerful force of the sprout literally breaking through the earth. Apollon is when it spreads out, wide growth. Cupido is the beautiful community of flowers blossoming together. Kronos is when the plant hits its peak, its maximum, authoritative height. And finally, Poseidon is its perfected, ideal state. It's a whole cycle of natural development from start to finish. And here's where it gets really wild. Proponents of this system claim that this same invisible natural cycle doesn't just describe how a plant grows. They believe it can be tested and actually used to predict financial market behavior. They think those positive and negative energies we saw in the chart correlate directly with the ups and downs of the economy. Which brings us to the legacy of the Uranian system. And it's a legacy that is, to say the least, controversial. It's challenging, and it really forces us to ask some pretty fundamental questions. Look, the idea of planets that no one can actually see it's a tough pill to swallow, right? It's understandable. Even other astrologers are often deeply skeptical, falling back on that very human, very common-sense instinct. If I can't see it, then it's not real.
So let's just recap this incredible story. It all started with a system born from the absolute chaos of World War I. That pressure led to the theory of 8 unseen planets way out beyond Neptune. This new system was framed as a kind of calculus to traditional astrology's algebra. Then we saw its most surprising claim, that it could be used to predict financial markets. And all of this leaves us with a fundamental challenge to the very idea that reality is only what we can physically see.
And that's really the provocative question this whole theory leaves us with. This entire system is built on one core idea, that you can test the effects of something even if you can't see the thing itself. So if any model, no matter where it comes from, seems to consistently produce accurate predictions, does it even matter if we can physically see it? It's a fascinating question about the very nature of proof itself.